Do you know a narcissist who plays the role of a perpetual victim? Someone who hates everyone in the world, or at least most people, because they can't take responsibility for their own problems, so they blame everyone else. A lot of times they've lost their ability to get or maintain supply. Friends and family members have just had enough, and so one by one they begin to abandon the narcissist, taking supply with them. Maybe they get older and lose their looks, or they become so self-involved they forget how to do the whole love bombing thing, or any combination or a number of other things. But they need narcissistic supply to continue to exist. So what do they do then? What happens when the narcissist can no longer obtain supply? Do they become a real person, or do they kind of lose it? What can you expect? Well, the sad truth is you're probably going to see a narcissistic collapse when this happens. It's a crisis, a narcissistic crisis. Whatever the label is, it's a big problem, and not just for the narcissist, but for everyone around them. It's almost like they're pretending, which they've always been. They've always been pretending. But in collapse, you see just the edges of humanity on a narcissist. You look close enough. Some narcissists will never actually see the truth until they reach collapse. And what I mean by this is some narcissists will not ever acknowledge that they have done anything ever wrong in their lives. They don't take responsibility for the pain they cause to other people. And in general, I think what it comes down to is that after they go through the collapse and they start to actually see through their unfiltered eyes, they start to recognize that no one around them actually likes them or even cares about them. People are just scared of them or feel obligated to them. And when this process begins to take hold, the narcissist can no longer pretend. And that is devastating. I mean, if you think about it, if you were that person and you realized all of a sudden that people had only been around you because they were afraid of you or because they were obligated to you, and they didn't actually care for you as a person and they kind of wished you would go away, that would be devastating, right? Well, then we understand how this might be, because narcissists are so delusional in their regular selves, in their normal form. They lie to themselves just as much as they lie to us. You might be wondering, how does a narcissistic collapse happen? Why does it happen? Almost inevitably, a narcissistic collapse happens because there's a narcissistic crisis. So what does that mean? Similar to a midlife crisis, but not exactly. The narcissist feels powerless, they feel rejected, they feel unworthy, and this feels like hell to them. The ultimate narcissistic injury. Interesting thing here is it's not just like they break up with someone or someone leaves them. Sometimes the loss of supply might just be because their main source of supply is going on a trip or going away from the home or whatever. And so when they aren't getting that supply, or even the idea that they might not have that supply for a period of time, they're devastated, they can't handle it. They will be depressed, they will feel lonely, they will feel anxious. It's difficult. So the way that a lot of them try to fix this is they'll look for higher grade supply or supply from anyone. Sometimes it doesn't happen, and then we have the collapse. So a lot of the times the reason a narcissist collapses in the first place is because they can no longer uphold that false self, that false image. People stop believing that. And often it happens, or can start to happen, when the mask is sort of threatened and they feel like someone is seeing beyond them, right? So this is when you see these little mini breakdowns, like when the narcissist in your life might attack you for no reason, where they might bring home their stress from work and pour it all over you like emotional garbage. When a narcissist collapses, you're going to see rage in many cases. Some will react differently. Some will cry, some will throw fits, but all of them will react in a way that you might call a little intense. They also have a desperate need for narcissistic supply. When they lose the ability to get that supply, they collapse, and at that time, you're going to see that when they don't receive that external validation, they're going to start to look for other ways to kind of hold up that false self. Very often, that looks like a very increased sense of superiority, even more than they ever had before. The lack of validation also leads to feelings of worthlessness, hopelessness, etc. That leads to more narcissistic rage. Also important to remember that not every narcissist will have a collapse. So when a narcissist is in collapse, it's usually because of their own dependence on narcissistic supply. They depend on the people around them for validation, for their own identity. And even though it might appear that the narcissist has a whole big personality, the truth is they very often don't have much of a personality at all without the people around them, without their sources of supply. The worst part is that most of them are actually quite insecure deep down. Not all of them, but most of them, especially when we're talking about those who could qualify as a covert narcissist or a vulnerable type of narcissist.
It's a covert narcissist. It's someone who appears to be introverted, kind of quiet, shy even. But in reality, they're exhibiting a certain type of narcissism that we call vulnerable narcissism or introverted narcissism. Covert narcissism is most commonly characterized by vulnerability and insecurity, which are two characteristics that manifest in defensiveness and hostility. A covert narcissist will have certain characteristics in common with a more overt or grandiose narcissist. This might include the inflated sense of entitlement, the feeling of being better than everyone else, grandiose fantasies, and a few more. They'll just sort of display those things a little differently than the more grandiose narcissist.
The narcissistic collapse feels to the narcissist very much like an episode of depression. The difference? They don't self-reflect because of that and the fact that the narcissist has only one of three types of empathy, which is cognitive empathy, meaning they can understand you logically, but they don't care and they aren't moved to take action to help you. They don't recognize what they've done wrong, and they cannot take personal responsibility. They don't really know they're living with a disorder anyway, so there are some things that they tend to do without even realizing what they're doing or why they're doing it when they're in collapse. They might start driving crazy or using drugs or drinking too much. They might gamble. They might display a ridiculous amount of narcissistic rage. They might self-harm or just be completely outrageously erratic. They might silent treatment you. They might be super oversensitive, super irritable. They're likely to have anxiety and some form of depression. And did I mention the narcissistic rage of it all? So what are some signs of narcissistic collapse? The first one I want to point out to you is the loss of self-esteem and the loss of perceived self-esteem, right? The type of self-esteem they're actually showing to the world, that goes away. They start to kind of talk down on themselves a little more. You might also notice the lack of self-identity or authenticity in the narcissist, which they've always lacked authenticity, but now it's very obvious to the people around them. When they lose their self-esteem, their self-image is pretty much erased. They start to self-value, they start to self-doubt. They might cling to some previous version of themselves and hold on to it a little too tightly. And because of this, they can appear kind of pathetic to people around them. That, of course, just makes them hate people more because they are unable to accept responsibility. It cannot be their fault. It must be someone else's fault. And while they'll tell that sob story and they'll really just soak in that supply they get from people feeling sorry for them, part of them knows exactly what's happening. And that part of them won't allow them to really officially accept the validation that they're kind of hanging on with, right? So if you've ever seen that show True Blood, they have this drink called True Blood, and the vampires in the show will drink True Blood and they won't die, but they really don't love it. They really prefer actual blood, right? So this is kind of the same thing with the narcissist in collapse. To actually allow the validation they're getting that's sustaining them, it's keeping them alive, but it's not fulfilling them the way it used to because they know it's fake or it's true blood, you see? Number two, they blatantly display self-hate, self-loathing, and they blatantly display a serious distaste for other people. See, since they feel like the world's against them, they tend to literally hate themselves to the point that they actually project this self-hate onto everyone around them. I mean, they figure, look, everybody hates me anyway, might as well hate them back, right? This brings me to number three. They have no more social life. It's non-existent or almost there. So they might still do a few things, but in general, social life is over for this collapsed narcissist. So since the narcissist really pretty much feels like they don't really like me, they're all fake anyway, why should I even bother to spend time with them and be kind? Why should I be kind to them? They stop trying because it stops working, but they reason to themselves that all those people are fake. All those people are not as good as me in some way, and so therefore I cannot be with them. I don't want to spend time with those people. Number four, you will see constant rage, constant narcissistic rage, and constant narcissistic injury in a little cycle over and over again, a little snowball, right? Because they're living in constant attack mode. They alternate narcissistic rage, narcissistic injury, along with other narcissistic manipulation tactics like gaslighting and projection, and etc. All of this in an attempt to force everyone around them to give them narcissistic supply. Number five, they can no longer hide their negative emotions. So we know they're overly sensitive. They are full of rage and hate. They will literally throw a temper tantrum that would rival a 2-year-old. I mean, it might be worse because they're an adult. They're outright intolerant, disrespectful, and in most cases, violent in words and in some cases, actions to the people around them. Speaking of which, no one wants to be around them. And if that narcissist could be self-aware enough to admit it, even they wouldn't choose to be around them. They're not pleasant. These are the Karens and the Kyles. Number six, the mask slips. Most narcissists have some semblance of a false self. This is who they present to the people around them in the world, the larger public, as it were. But when the narcissist is dealing with collapse, that previously maintained facade, nice, cool, easygoing, whatever, friendly, laid back kind of person, well, that kind of falls away. And the true face of the narcissist is revealed: rage, ugliness, and general disgust for humanity. The difference between someone who is a narcissist in collapse and someone who is a victim of a smear campaign is, number one, the victim of a smear campaign who is a survivor of narcissistic abuse is not going to actively try to hurt other people. They're not going to require supply from other people in the same way that a narcissist would. A victim or a survivor of narcissistic abuse is generally someone who's a very kind-hearted person and who doesn't try to use people to their advantage. They don't try to take from someone and not give back. A narcissist displays a marked lack of empathy and is more than happy to use people, and they have no remorse. And that's what happens when the narcissist collapses. They lose their ability to get supplies easily in many cases, so they get even worse and they develop sometimes even more manipulative ways to get what they want. Like, for example, if they previously they wanted through how they looked, then they get what they want by guilt or by taking care of people to get the people to be obligated to them, for example. Is the collapsed narcissist always old? Is it always the aging narcissist? Not always. In some cases, a collapsed narcissist can happen when circumstances change in a person's life. So maybe they were once married to a very rich person and they were all snooty and snippy. That a person dumped them and they didn't do well in the divorce. Now they're collapsing. Or maybe they were once, had a perfect body and a perfect face, and maybe they gained a whole bunch of weight. Or maybe they got in some sort of accident and their face got messed up. In any case, the collapsed narcissist is the picture of misery. If they weren't so mean and hateful, you might even feel sorry for them. All right, now this brings me to the question of the day. And the question of the day is, do you know a collapsed narcissist? Have you experienced a collapsed narcissist? And what was that like? Share your thoughts, share your ideas, and share your experiences in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. And before I go, make sure you take a look at the videos I'm going to leave for you right there and right there. And while you're here, hit that subscribe button right over there so we can stay connected and continue on this healing journey together.